Hello everyone, good morning, good night, good evening, welcome back to the channel. It's been a minute since I talked about iPads. I think the last time I talked about an iPad was the iPad OS update, and that was like forever ago, and I figured I might as well bring back another still worth it video for this specific iPad. And this one was actually the last mini iPad Apple made until their recent announcement of their iPad mini 5, and this iPad, the iPad mini 4, came out in 2015, and there was a pretty long gap. I mean, it was about 3.5 years from their last iPad mini to their newest one, which is the iPad mini 5. And yes, that one is much better, has this and that, but ultimately I still think the iPad mini 4 still has a little bit of value left in it. I don't think it's completely slow or bad or anything like that, but it is a little. I'll explain that throughout this video. Now, that iPad mini 5 is probably the biggest update that we've had since the iPad mini 4. I mean, nothing really has been affected, specifically the iPad mini 4, since then, except iOS 13, but that's a whole different story. Now, looking at the front of the iPad mini 4, we have a 7.9-inch IPS panel. The resolution of this, it is a Retina display, whatever you want to call it. It's 1536 by 2048 with 324 pixels per inch, and it's actually not that bad of a panel. I think the panel is probably the biggest assets of this iPad. It's not probably the best IPS panel. You know, they could have probably put an OLED. I'm surprised no iPads have OLED displays yet, but this, without a doubt, I think it's definitely one of its assets. Like I stated, it's a really good looking panel. However, compared to something like an iPad Pro or other iPads even, this one has quite a bit of bezel on it. The screen to body ratio is 70.6%, so the iPad Pros is much smaller, and the display on this, you know, it's not a massive display either. And when I'm using it, when I was going through things, I mean, you could definitely tell it doesn't feel like the most premium thing in the world, but it doesn't feel like a super cheap thing either, because you have to keep in mind things like the iPad mini 5 and even the iPad Air keep this kind of same design, or the iPad Air 3 or whatever it is. The design is still almost the same, so there might be less bezel on the iPad Air 3, but the iPad mini 4 and mini 5 have the same bezel, and Apple's still selling that, so there's some warrant and some reasoning for that. So without a doubt, I'll definitely tell you, yes, it looks like an older display, an older device, because it is an older device, but that shouldn't deter you from picking something up, in my opinion. The home button is there with Touch ID, and to me, that's actually a pretty big plus. I like that a lot. I like Touch ID a lot. Face ID is cool and everything. I'm getting kind of used to it, but Touch ID still has its place in my heart. And you have the lightning port on the bottom, a headphone jack as well, which is cool. On the back, single camera, and that pretty much covers up the whole entire body. There's really not too much going on. It's a pretty minimalistic design, so that has pros and some cons. No USB Type-C, but you can still do a lot with a lightning port with an iPad, so that pretty much covers it up in the outside. Now, talking about the software, this thing was released with iOS 9. You are able to upgrade it to iOS 13. Right now we're on 13.2.2, and I'll definitely tell you, you know, it's definitely probably going to stop at iOS 13. I was even surprised that it got iOS 13 because this thing has the same chipset as the iPhone 6. However, this thing does have the extra gigabyte of RAM, so, you know, that's a good thing. That's the reason this thing got the upgrade. But I think, I don't know, if this one got it and the iPad Air 2 got it, I feel like the iPhone 6 could have supported iOS 13, but that's a different story. This one specifically, it's really pushing it. I'm pretty sure it's going to stop at iOS 13. It's not going to go further, guys, but I have no proof. I have no insider knowledge, but based off past behavior and based off even there's just the specs of this specific iPad, it's probably going to stop at iOS 13. But that's not a bad thing either. If you're watching this in the later part of 2019, which you should be, most probably it's still going to last you a couple months in software support, which is awesome. But on top of that, just because it stops at iOS 13 doesn't mean you can't go further with it, you know? There's still going to be App Store updates. There's still going to be a lot of developments outside of just those standard software updates. So yes, you won't be able to get the newest iOS 14 update features, but you'll still be able to get all those cool little features of your app updates. And Temple Run got a new skin or something like that, so you can go and update to that. So there's some pros and cons here and there, but without a doubt, I'll definitely tell you the software updates is probably stopping at iOS 13, but that shouldn't deter you from picking something like this up. You know, there's a lot other reasons I think to not pick this up. The software updates, it's kind of up in the air, you know, but without a doubt, I'll definitely tell you software updates, it's stopping at iOS 13. Now, moving on to the performance side of things. Now, this thing had the Apple A8 chip, a dual-core CPU with 2 gigabytes of RAM. Now, there were 4 different models of the iPad mini 4, a 16 gigabyte variant, a 32 gigabyte variant, 64 gigabyte variant, and 128 gigabyte variant. I know I say gigabyte wrong, I'm sorry guys, but those were the variants of this. They all had the same amount of RAM, which is awesome, cool, okay, whatever. Performance side though, I'll tell you, I mean, it's not a bad performing device. device. I never thought the iPad mini 4 was a bad performing device at all, but it's just kind of quirky in some different ways. And the reason I say that and the meaning behind that is I just see a lot of stutters. I feel like it opens things up pretty fast. I mean, I don't feel like I'm like, oh my god, this thing was so slow. I don't feel like I'm like that, but it just comes across as something that's kind of like it's noticeably stuttering when I open something up. And I think that's the main thing I've realized with it. When I'm gaming, whenever I'm doing anything with it, I don't really feel like I'm like having a horrible device. I don't feel like it's super slow or anything like that. Like, I feel like it's a pretty good performing device, even with iOS 13 and even with all these new updates and everything like that, and even with the Mini 5. Like, I still think this is a pretty compelling device. But the funny thing is that Apple A8 chip really didn't do its justice. And even if they just put an Apple A9 chip in it, that would have been awesome. This thing was released in 2015 in September, the same time the iPhone 6s was released. So the reasoning why Apple put an older chipset inside of it is beyond me. I don't know why they did that. So for a 2015 device with an iPhone 6 chipset, it's not bad. I mean, if you compare it to something like now with the iPad Pros, it's not really that good, if I'm being honest. You're losing out on some features like USB Type-C as well as that ProMotion display. This iPad does not have those features. But with all that being said, with the details behind this that we know, 2015 iPad with the iPhone 6 chipset with 2GB of RAM, it's not a bad performing device. Now, if you're using this for school or something like that, that's probably what I would recommend you to do, because, if you're typing up papers, if you're reading notes or whatever that case is, you're going to be perfectly fine. I mean, this thing can do split view, so you can have your notes on one side and like your documents on the other. If you're someone who's like going to be using your iPad a ton and you need the most compelling, most latest and greatest things, you're going to be doing like video editing and stuff, I probably wouldn't get the iPad mini 4 for that. I mean, if you need something that's like going to be very light tasks or something like kind of casual device to watch Netflix on or something, that's probably the extent I would do it on. But if you want to go anything further, it's capable on this iPad. It's not like it's impossible or anything like that, but it's just not as good as something that you might even find in a compelling price or comparison price if you pick up like a used iPad Air 2 or like a used iPad Pro first generation. Those are some things that I would recommend you to do. Forget the iPad Air 2. Look at that iPad Pro first generation that has a ton of power within it, and it's still kind of being sold for the same price as the iPad mini 4. But like I said, I'll hit on that in a second. But ultimately, what I can tell you is in terms of performance, anything higher than even light task or even intermediate task or whatever, I probably wouldn't recommend you to get it for. But if you're okay with some stutters here and there and kind of slower performance across the board, then I guess be my guest. But I wouldn't do anything crazy with it, in my opinion. That pretty much covers that. I'm going to go ahead and hit on the camera for like 20 seconds. This thing has a 8 megapixel camera on the back. You can shoot 1080p videos on it, and that's pretty much it. It doesn't have portrait mode. It doesn't have like night mode. It doesn't have anything like that. No 4K at all. And pretty much just envision the iPhone 6 camera ported over to an iPad. That's exactly what this is. It is an iPhone 6 camera. It's almost like an iPhone 6 in a tablet form, just with an extra gigabyte of RAM. And even the camera, I mean, it's like very average. I don't really think anybody's going to be using this camera, and they're definitely not buying this iPad for the camera. It's just kind of like, oh, I'm FaceTiming somebody. Let me use this as a thing. Or I'm Snapchatting people. Let me go and say, like, that's the reason people would mostly get it. I don't see why anybody would use the camera besides those things. But that's pretty much it. It's okay. I mean, it's not an end-all be-all, but, it's whatever. A 1.2 megapixel front-facing camera, and that's one of the main things people are going to be using with, I think, is the front camera because of FaceTime and stuff. So overall, I'll definitely tell you, it's nice that this thing has cameras built into it. I don't think it's like a great camera. I don't think it's even a good camera, but for an iPad, at least it has cameras on it. So I'll give it the benefit of the doubt. Moving on to the battery life, it comes with a 5,124 mAh battery, which is actually not too shabby. I mean, it's not completely bad. However, because this thing was released in 2015, the battery health, it's probably not at that full 100%. So it's probably, at 90%, 80%, whatever it is. So it's not at that full 5,124 mAh hours. It's probably at like 4,000 or even less than that, who knows. But battery life, it's actually not that bad, I'll be completely honest. Standby time is very, very great. If you're using it, it's not that bad either. This thing isn't like a complete powerhouse, so it's not really sucking up that much power, which is a good thing. So I'll definitely tell you, in terms of battery and overall power, well, more so battery, it could definitely last you for as long as you want to. It's not a completely horrible device in terms of battery, which is a really good thing for these iPad, especially the iPad mini. The iPad mini 2 had a really great battery life in my opinion. The mini 4, more of the same, but it just depends on how that battery health is. If that battery health is really, really bad, then it's not going to be that great battery life. But if that battery life, if the person who took care of it before you, if you bought it used or if you bought it new, whatever, if the device was taken care of and you didn't put it in super hot conditions or anything, then the battery life should be okay in my so. And it's definitely not a reason to stay away from this iPad in my opinion. Now, my overall opinion on the iPad mini 4 is, I probably would not pick one of these things up right now in the later part of 2019 and probably going onward. And the reasoning behind that isn't because it's a horrible device, isn't because it's ugly, isn't it because of whatever. It's mostly because of the price in the used market. Like, I'm still seeing these things sold for quite a bit of money, even with the iPad mini 5 released. And I find that kind of weird because this device it's okay. Like, I'm not going to say it's bad, but like, there's so many better devices you can get there for like even just a little bit more money. And I mentioned earlier the iPad Pro first generation, that one before even like the 10.5 inch, it was a standard 9.7 inch one. That's the one I have. I kind of like it, and it's still more powerful than my iPad mini 4. I believe that has the Apple A9 chip, and I would highly recommend you to pick that one up over this one. You can get them for around the same price. Another one, I wouldn't really get the iPad Air 2. That iPad Pro first generation is probably the main one I would recommend. That one, I already did a review on it a while ago. I can update it if you guys want to. Hit that like button if you guys want to see it. But I'll definitely tell you, iPad mini 4, not a bad device, but I'll probably pick up a first gen iPad Pro if you want to save money and get a kind of more portable device as well. Of course, that one is bigger than the Mini 4, but it's really hard to kind of beat the size of the Mini 4, and that's one of its biggest assets. So if you want a smaller device, get the Mini 4. If you can go even just a little bit bigger for around the same cost, I'll pick up a Pro first gen. So I'll find the cheapest iPad Mini 4s and the iPad Pro first gens that I find on Amazon, and I'll link them straight down in the description so you guys can get them from there and help support the channel at the same time. But that is pretty much it. If you guys have any other questions or anything, leave it down in the comment section below. Hit that like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it would mean so much if you guys could hit that. Also, check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel. All those links are linked down below. I'd really appreciate it if you guys could check it out. But more importantly than everything else, I love every single you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out.